Jim, oh no, please join us. And James is on, Minister Shaw is on screen. Brilliant. Well, kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you for joining us here today. In particular, our thanks as ministers go to our sector leaders who are here with us today at what is no doubt a very busy time of year for everyone. So my sincere appreciation to each of you. I'll begin with a few introductory comments and each speaker will then hand over to the next. I acknowledge Minister Shaw is joining us from Wellington. Good morning, Minister Shaw. At a time when we have a deteriorating global economy, our exporters remain a part of our very strong foundation. In the past 5 years, we've worked hard to strengthen their position, and it's worked. Free trade agreements now cover almost 75% of our exports, and food and beverage exports alone have increased over 40%. But our reputation has helped. Our consumers are demanding that our products are sustainable. Recent announcements and statements by large buyers like Nestle and Tesco demonstrate that. For the sake of our exporters and our environment, we must keep moving. In recent years, we've worked hard with the primary sector to commit to a workable and fair emissions reduction system for agriculture, which contributes nearly half of New Zealand's total emissions, including most of the nitrous oxide and methane emissions. And today, we published the Pricing Agricultural Emissions Report, the Section 215, under the Climate Change Response Act, which represents consensus with farming leaders and sets out how we intend to progress a pricing system for agricultural activities as an alternative to the New Zealand Emissions Trading Scheme, with final decisions to be made early next year. While there is still more work to do, we've worked hard to develop this update with sector leaders. It's fair to say it's been a work in progress, but progress it is. Through He Waka Eke Noa, the government and our primary industries have been working together to get underway a pricing and reduction system that works, which means it must be practical, ensure the viability of the productive agriculture sector, and will reduce emissions in line with agreed targets. It will also enhance our export brand and unlock an emerging and significant price premium for climate-friendly products. And with the publishing of this report today, we move forward through consensus on how the system should work. I want to reiterate first and foremost that consensus on climate action has always been my priority and the priority of our government. That's how we ensure longevity on climate action that cannot afford a yo-yo approach. But action is and remains at the heart of that plan. We've listened to farmers and growers after our recent consultation and talked to industry leaders. We now have a joint commitment to the key components of the agricultural emissions reduction system. Jim and Tracy and leadership from He Waka Eke Noa join me today alongside our ministers to announce these next steps together. To the sector, I want to say that our primary sector's leaders, your advocates, have been strong. We haven't always agreed, but we have found a pathway through. We've listened, we've heard all concerns, especially around the areas like sequestration and price setting, and around the inclusion of the impact on households as consumers. And today, through this report, we move forward on these aspects, and Minister O'Connell will speak to that in more detail shortly. But first, let me say this. We cannot allow perfect to be the enemy of the good. We must keep making progress, and we can and improve and refine over time. Our farming sector has always been a few decades ahead of the world in many ways: sustainability, technologically, genetics, protecting our soil, animal welfare. But to maintain that pole position, it is imperative we take that next step. Reducing emissions on farm is clearly the next frontier and is the way forward. The sector's clear commitment to farm level reduction over what some could have assumed would have been an easier producer levy speaks to their commitment to build the best possible system that works at grassroots level for the long term. We want the same thing: a good system that goes the distance, that reduces emissions and improves our environment, that gives us that competitive edge, the very thing that provides certainty to all, farmers, exporters, our export markets. And in many ways, we don't have as far to go as others. Global subsidies in agriculture in many ways means farmers around the world have a long road ahead of them. Our journey is advanced, and it is one that provides certainty for our economy well into the long term, as well as to the markets we supply. There are always going to be hurdles to overcome as we progress one of the biggest changes that we've experienced in our food and fibre production sector in decades, but we can take heart today. We're a step closer to getting on the most sustainable and strongest footing for the times ahead, and we've done it together. Before I hand over to Minister Shaw, I just want to share my personal thanks with our farming leaders and our primary producers as a sector. I have probably not met with a group as frequently as I have met with all of you, and for good reason. You're a significant contributor to our economy. You are close to those farmers that you represent on the ground. You know where the anxieties exist, and you know where the potential opportunities lie as well. And I've always felt at our heart that we have had the same goals in mind, and that is to keep being the most sustainable food producers in the world. So thank you for your commitment to this work. I know there's more work to do, but I know we'll get the best possible outcome by working together. Minister Shaw, I now would like to hand over to you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And I'm sorry I'm unable to join you in person today. Look, there are farmers up and down the country who want to do and are doing the right thing for the climate. But as with every other industry, whilst the leaders of the pack are doing great things, overall emissions are yet to come down on a sustained basis. And like I said, this is an issue that we've got right across the economy. Addressing this is not a job for the sector alone. The government has a big part to play in this as well. Our job is to create the best possible policy environment, one that is predictable and stable over the long term and provides a level of certainty that farmers need to be able to invest in low emissions solutions. It is up to our farmers to seize the opportunities that this will create. That is why we committed to pricing agricultural emissions, to incentivise the most cost-effective emissions reductions whilst also improving on-farm profitability. For decades, government after government failed to equip farmers with the tools that they needed to remain profitable in a changing world. So now it falls to us. By 2030, we have to cut our biogenic methane emissions by 10% compared to 2017 levels to have any chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. We have only 7 years left, so we have to get this right. If we do, not only will we pass on to our kids a world that is better for what we did, but we will also unleash a period of unprecedented innovation and opportunity for New Zealand farmers, whilst keeping the climate healthy. My priority as Climate Change Minister is, and always will be, to put in place policies that meet our climate targets. Of course, we can and should, and we do, debate the best way to do this. But to deny where we need to get to, and that we will need to make changes in order to get there, risks betraying future generations and denying us the gains that are to be made. We know it's not easy, but we do have to make it work. The report that we're releasing today marks an important step towards delivering on our promise to put a price on agricultural emissions. It sets the direction of travel. We're not actually at the destination point yet. There is still a lot of work to be done to make sure that the system works for farmers and brings emissions down at the pace required to protect the climate. And with final decisions set to be made early in the new year, I do look forward to continuing this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Shaw. I now would like to hand over to Tracy Haupapa of the Federation of Māori Authorities, who have been critical partners in the He Waka I Kanoa work programme. Tracy.
Tēnā koe te perimena koutou rā e ngā minita. Hurinua kia koutou rā I rongi I ngā hoi tangutua tēnā koutou. FOMA, the Federation of Māori Authorities, remains committed to the He Waka I Kanoa partnership with government and industry. We acknowledge He Waka I Kanoa is the best compromise for a sector that is facing increasing market demand for sustainability credentials from consumers of our products. Consumer needs and wants for food and fibres have changed, and global indicators show that agribusiness needs to adapt and respond accordingly. We are focused on the opportunities as both regulatory and market demands look to our farmers and growers to innovate and provide leadership to reinforce our global position as sustainable producers of food and fibres once again. Maori are intergenerational land owners and managers, and once incentives for change, enablers and rewards are identified, our history shows that we can and do transform and adapt our land use. Māori accept the need to change land use and management practices for the good of te taiao, our environment, and our people. Te ao Māori thinking promotes an integrated systems change approach in response to all environmental and climate challenges, and supports the need to transition land use in response to climate change and achieve a lower economy. For Māori, FOMA wants a scheme that effectively reduces emissions, gives farmers and growers the ability to understand their profiles and have options to reduce their emissions, allows time for markets to respond and be willing to improve farm and orchard gate returns as farmers and growers adopt greater sustainability measures, gives our sector enough runway to either have commercially available reduction technology or enough options to reduce emissions by planning, claiming a sequestration, so on. And finally, incentivises, enables and rewards good farming and growing practices. FOMA seeks a fair and just transition for whenua Māori through incentives and supports, recognising, enabling and rewarding good practice and promoting Māori collectives as an important and natural leadership and operating model for whenua Māori. While many of the details, as the Prime Minister has mentioned, remain to be finalised, FOMA is pleased to see He Waka Noa partnership and to progress toward a scheme that recognises the unique circumstances of whenua Māori and in the interests of our wider primary sector for Aotearoa New Zealand. Kia ora. I'd like to invite now Jim Vanderpoel, the Chair of Dairy New Zealand.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. And I want to thank the Prime Minister and James too for their comments, really, and the progress that has been made here. I think it's worth noting in all of these discussions, we can't lose sight of the fact that farmers are always the first to feel the impact of a changing climate. You know, they're working at it every day, you know, and we collectively see ourselves as being part of the solution here, and we want to do our fair share to what are our commitments going forward. But as we've always said, the settings and the targets need to be practical, pragmatic and fair, and so that we can maintain profitable businesses, strong rural communities, while also protecting the environment and meeting our commitments to the Paris Agreement. Today's announcement is another step on what has been a long journey for both farmers, the He Waka Noa partners and government, obviously. That journey isn't over, and there is still a lot more we will need to do next year. But for now, it's nice to finish the year on a positive note. We are pleased to see the government have listened to farmers and to the rural community who have voiced their concerns during the consultation period, and that important changes have been made as we've worked together through those. I think it's fair to say these changes have been a direct result of the goodwill engagement that we've had together and the advocacy on behalf of the sector. You know, and it just shows what we can achieve when we stay at the table and work through the tough issues together in a constructive way. What the government have come back with is something that is much more closely aligned to what the sector was looking for, because remember the sector had some real concerns around some of the implications of this, you know, and we've worked constructively together to try and work through those very issues. But as Tracy said too, you know, we'll work through the detail in the new year to make sure these are bedded in, so which is important. So there have been important changes to the way the price will be set, farmers' ability to manage and report their emissions, and as collectives, as well as the recognition farmers can get from plantings on their farms. We've made good progress. There are still issues that we want to continue to work through with the government, including the legislative timelines, the retention of the processor levy backstop, and the reduced role of the oversight body. And these are some of the things we'll try to work through in the new year. So we look forward to picking that up in the new year as we continue to actually advocate strongly on behalf of farmers, rural communities and New Zealand as a whole and get the right outcomes. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Sarah Patterson, who is the chair of the Hei Waka Kanoa Steering Group. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Tēnā koutou. I'm Sarah Patterson. I'm the Independent Chair of Hei Waka Kanoa. I want to acknowledge the primary sector partners who couldn't make it here today. It's a busy time of year and it just wasn't possible for them to fit travel in. I know there is at least one who would have liked to have been here today but is busy weaning some lambs. However, I can say that all the partners who signed the joint submission appreciate the government's willingness to work through the issues that we raised. And while there's still work to do, the government's report today is an important milestone and moves in the right direction toward an emissions pricing system that's workable, reduces emissions and maintains a viable and productive agriculture sector. I highlight the progress that's been made on the approach to price settings, in particular recognition that prices should be the lowest possible and fixed for a 5-year period to provide certainty, and agreement to take social, cultural and economic impacts into account when setting the price. There's also a commitment, as Jim mentioned, recognising broader categories of sequestration and to work to finalise how this will look in practice. There are also areas that submission partners will continue to focus on, including a balanced approach to price setting and ensuring that the advice of the Oversight Board is given adequate weight. And as Jim mentioned, submission partners don't support having a backstop of a processor levy because our focus should be on having a farm level scheme in place from the start. And our partners remain committed to continuing to work together with government to develop a scheme that's fair, effective and practical. And I'd just like to close by taking the opportunity to thank ministers, officials, primary sector, Māori agribusiness partner teams that have worked hard to get us to this point today, and wish them a restful break and hope they come back ready to work together in the new year as we finalise the scheme. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll let Minister O'Connor wrap us up and then we'll move to
Kia ora koutou, and look, thank you very much for being here. Nothing good comes easy, and this hasn't been an easy process, but it's one worth battling for. And I have to acknowledge the sector leaders, the politicians who have worked with us, but also the people who have made submissions over the last few months to have input into this process. We've now reached what is a legislated, of course, obligation to report back prior to December the 31st, but it's a point of agreement that it's wonderful to achieve before the end of the year. It's not the final agreement, but it is consensus around some of the core issues where there was some debate. Even since the last time we had a launch, we've had clear signals coming from the market. We've had a Westpac report indicating the threats to agriculture itself from climate change, but the opportunities there as well. We've had from Nestle, from Fonterra, from other companies like Tesco, clear indications that there are opportunities for New Zealand into the future if we can show an emissions reduction pathway. So that's what we are hoping to achieve for the future farmers and food producers of our country. Look, we have established a 5-year pathway for pricing to offer some certainty for farmers, something they were asking for. The emissions levy will be set at the lowest possible price to ensure we have enough revenue to pay back and for the mitigations, but also to not impose an unnecessary burden on farmers as they work through this. We've also ensured that the agricultural sector will oversee the levy allocation process, something they were seeking reassurance on. And, of course, we've agreed through the sequestration plan to recognise all scientifically robust sequestration that occurs on farm. Look, there are other technical issues here that officials from sector organisations and from government have been working through. This is a great step forward, and I welcome it. And this is about future-proofing the agriculture sectors of our country so that we have a better future as we move from volume to values and to be the leading food producers of the world. Kia ora.
Thank you, Minister O'Connor. Okay, we're happy to take your questions. If I may, I might start on He Waka, and then if there are other general issues, I might then release everyone and then get into those specifics. So, Simon.
About consensus, but federated farmers are not part of the joint submission on this. So how can you talk about consensus when like 13,000 farmers as part of Federated Farmers, are not on board with this?
Here, of course, we have worked alongside the Federation of Maori Authorities, Dairy, NZ, Beef and Lamb, the horticultural sector, to ensure that we are building as much consensus as we can in this space to continue to make progress. Look, here you have one sector representative who has taken an alternate view, but for the most part you see very strong consensus across a wide range of industry bodies.
Is it a concern that they are not on board? I mean, how can you set a price when they are not on board?
I can feel that Minister O'Connor is inching towards the podium perhaps on this one. Look, you know, fundamentally though, there had to be agreement that this is a necessary step. We believe it is, and as you can see from the sector representatives here today, they believe it is. We have some of the most sustainable food producers in the world. Our farmers do an exceptional job currently. I don't want them to lose that position. You can already see in negotiating our free trade agreements that unless we demonstrate what we are doing to reduce down what represents the most significant proportion of our emissions profile, we will fall behind as an exporting nation. I cannot stand here as a leader and responsibly allow that to happen because it will come at a cost to our farmers. So that is our very strong view, that this is in our long-term economic interest as much as it is in our environmental interest. Does anyone wish to speak on the Federated Farmers question? Yeah, Minister O'Connor.
Look, very briefly, all those farmers are represented through their levy-paying bodies, and so while Fed Farmers took a decision to step back from it and to reserve its position to advocate on behalf of, I think most of their farmer members are advocated very well for through the sector bodies to get on with this. But we respect their right to stay to one side and to offer opinions, and we'll deal with those.
I think that Federated Farmers is a representative body.
I think, look, they represent them through a different pathway than through the advocacy bodies here that are paid for by the levies, by real money from the farmers.
Increasingly, though, we also need to look at the signal that the likes of our dairy processors, for instance, if we use them as an example, they both interface with their shareholders, farmers, but also with consumers and buyers. And their position is abundantly clear. We do need to keep making progress in this space, and they can see why, because it is being made clear to them by their buyers and our consumers of our products offshore that we need to keep making progress, and I'm confident we can and will.
There still seems to be a gap between what the government wants and what industry groups want. How big is that gap now? How much of that have you managed to close?
Here, I would say you can see here we have broad consensus in this next stage through this report. And that's incredibly important to us because we want to ensure that we have a system that will stand the test of time. So we have consensus, and now we have some extra details to keep working through, and we'll do that through till about March next year. But I'm confident that through the progress that we've made, that we will keep working together and produce a system that will be not a perfect first iteration, but a necessary one and represent progress for us all.
How big are those issues you still need to work through, and can a compromise?
I see that the fundamentals are here, the consensus is there is further detail, but I remain absolutely confident that we'll be able to work through them together. The sector's principles are about a viable system and support for our food producers as we make this transition. We share those goals. We also share the goal of reducing our emissions. So long as we keep those goals in sight, we'll get there.
You talked a bit about the impact on exports and the FTAs. How
Yep.
worried were you that if we couldn't come to an agreement that would start causing issues for New Zealand's reputation and for those?
Minister Shaw, I wonder whether or not you might speak to what we're seeing out of Europe and the developments around border levies there. It's a bit of an indication, I think, of where the market is going.
Yeah, so the European Union about 2 weeks ago finalised the first tranche of what's known as a carbon border adjustment, which essentially means that they can put a tariff on inbound imports into the European Union if the country of origin isn't pricing those products in the same way that the EU is. Initially, those are applying to kind of carbon dioxide-based imports like steel and so on. but they have indicated that it will extend to agriculture at some point. Now, our trade officials have been working very closely alongside their EU officials over the last year or so since they first announced that they would be doing this. But we know that there is a trend in that direction, and that essentially trade advantage is starting to accrue to countries that are doing the heavy lifting on climate change, and trade disadvantage is starting to accrue to those countries that are dragging the chain. And having those kind of border adjustment levies is kind of the first, the start of that. I know that the Netherlands will be pricing methane via a methane tax from 2024, which is a year before we will start producing. Ireland the other day said that they would be reducing their herd size by about 10% by 2030. Canada is looking at quite dramatic reductions in methane as well. So we're not alone in this. We are certainly one of the first countries in the world, but we're certainly not the only one who is grappling with this. And as countries like ours who are grappling with this continue to do so, you can see that we will be putting pressure on other countries that are not kind of getting on board to do so.
While Minister Shaw's up there, I don't know if you can hear or not, how do you feel as Green Party co-leader about this deal, about some of the issues where the government has had to compromise, particularly around, say, the lowest possible pricing, etc.?
Well, I mean, it's a matter of the public record. I've said this for some time, that I think that there are probably simpler, more effective systems that are out there. But ultimately, the political economy of all of this is that the sector leaders have said that this is the system that they want. This system needs to endure across multiple changes of government over the coming decades. And so anything that is, we could set up the perfect system now, but if it gets dismantled the next time there's a change of government because an incoming national government decides, as they did 14 years ago with the ETS to mess it up, then we're not making any progress. And so every aspect of climate change policy is frustrating, whether that's domestic or international. But you have to, the climate crisis is so significant, we have to make progress with what's on the table.
Can I have one more question, Mr. Shaw? Are you concerned that going after a low price pathway is not going to be enough to reach the goals, enough to induce change of behaviour?
The two are linked, yeah. So of course, sorry, Minister Shaw, you go ahead.
Well, I mean,
would you prefer a higher price pathway? Would you prefer a higher price pathway?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, this was a concern that the Commission raised, which is that, you can use price to drive behaviour. The system that's been outlined here is to essentially, in creating a levy, is to generate revenue that is then used to create a pool for incentives to make the switch. So it's essentially a different model from what we're using from the rest of the economy.
Yeah, but keep in mind, we have targets. We have targets to reduce our methane emissions, which both government and the sector are committed to. Of course, our goal is that you would have a levy set at a level that ultimately is the lowest possible price required to meet our reduction goals. And so built into these proposals is the idea that if you find that we are off track or overachieving, we have the ability to look at the price. Jim wanted to say something.
Because I think one of the key principles of He Waka Kanoa is that, as the Prime Minister said, we need to set the price to achieve the targets, but the whole intention is to get the right behavioural change on our farms and in our rural communities. That's where the change will come. So He Waka Kanoa is set up to incentivise the right behaviour change rather than just use price as the only mechanism. And so, as it's been said, we shouldn't put the levy any higher that's needed to achieve those outcomes.
Well, just on your release today about this, you said that you're also interested in changing or making sure there's commitment to look at new science around calculating the methane levels. Are you saying that the methane levels are probably too high?
What we're saying is that the science around this is evolving all the time, and every time the targets are being reviewed, we should take into the latest science and consider that as part of the process about what are the appropriate targets for us to have to achieve.
Are you concerned that the latest science has been taken into account?
Well, the latest science evolved a lot since those targets were put in place, And so next time it's reviewed, and you'll see that was one of the things we asked for as part of this process, that when that review happens, that we take the latest science into consideration with a whole lot of other factors as well, but that is considered as part of it.
We already have review periods built in as part of the Zero Carbon Act, so it's not out of step with what we would advocate as well.
Okay.
Katie?
What to you are the key sticking points still?
It's the detail. You know, we acknowledge that a lot of progress has been made, but it's the detail about how that's implemented, and the whole governance structure for us is really important, you know, how that'll actually work in practice, you know, how, you know, like as Tracy has said, you know, I think it was Sarah that said too, that it's around making sure that we do everything we can to get the farmer levy up and running, so we don't put an interim one in place before we do that, you know, how collectives will work, you know, it's those kind of key things, and it's we acknowledge that a lot of progress has been made, but we also acknowledge that, you know, the detail has still to be worked through. And so until that detail's worked through, it's hard for us to sit here and say categorically we've got this nailed.
What's the issue with the interim levy? Why is there such a problem with that?
Oh, the interim processor.
The interim processor levy? Well, we think we should be doing everything we can to put because that's what we believe will drive the right outcomes. Because when farmers themselves have said that they want to know what their actual numbers are, and they want to know that when they change their farming behaviours, you know, and reduce their emissions, that they want to be recognised for that. They don't want to go through a processor levy where they just it all gets averaged out. And so we want to do everything we can to put that in place because we believe that will drive the right outcomes. And so we want to do everything we can to put that in place from day one rather than have an interim and then move to that at a later date. So that's what our position is.
Can I just add, we totally agree with that. If the entire goal of this system is to reduce down our overall emissions profile, and that means actually let's empower our farmers and our food producers to know how we can best achieve that farm by farm, because otherwise you could feel relatively powerless in a system that just is levied at a processor levy and at level when everyone receives the cost or the bill for that. The only reason we have that backstop is we've got very ambitious timelines. Creating a system that allows you to work farm by 2025 is a very big undertaking. Now, currently, the legislative backstop is the ETS. Now, as much as our farmers don't want a processor level levy, I think they'd want the ETS even less. And so the processor levy is a backstop for us, but it is not our goal. Our goal remains farm by farm, and we will be doing everything we can to reach that goal. The processor levy allows us to at least avoid the ultimate backstop, which is the ETS. Yeah.
Right, so how realistic?
Yeah, and then come here, and then I might finish up here and then move on to a couple of other topics. Yeah.
How realistic do you think that 2025 goal is, and when will we see a finalised plan so that the work can get underway to achieve that?
Next phase in responding to the submissions that we've received on He Waka Eke Noa is March. We then need to crack on in earnest with ensuring that we are ready to implement by 2025. They are ambitious timelines, but we remain committed to them.
Will this involve like every farm needing technology? Is it ready, or is that already being put in place?
And that will continue to be an evolving situation. We already have some practice that we know makes a difference to methane and reducing emissions, but I expect that even over the next 12 to 24 months, we will continue to see significant evolution in this space. We have to be nimble in order to demonstrate that can be factored in farm by farm, and that's part of some of the issues that we've been discussing as part of the Section 215. How do we quickly and easily take those technological advancements and innovation into account in our incentives regime, for instance?
And how low will the levy be?
You'll forgive me that if today we won't be discussing the levy itself, because this is all about establishing the process for it.
Isn't it true that it would have always been as low as it could have been to achieve this?
It's fair to say that some of, Minister Shaw, I won't repeat what he said. He's already talked about the levy and the incentives regime and the way that will interact together in order to try and incentivise behaviour change farm by farm. So I won't traverse that again. That is what the system is designed to do. But some of the reasons we restate that is because we want to be clear, this is not a revenue-raising exercise. Everything that is taken in as a levy will be distributed back out and be part of the system to try and reduce our emissions profile. So it's really important that we keep restating that.
Just on another
Do you mind then if anything else then I might then just... Did you want to say one final thing there, Jim, as well?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is Merry Christmas, everybody. Have a good break and see you in the new year.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Minister. Minister Shaw, anything from you before we wrap? All good? Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay.
High Court judgment has found the returning orders, Offenders Act is breaching numerous rights of fine for deportees. Is that concerning? Do you expect damage?
We want to take I want to take a bit of time to go through the High Court decision, but what remains a clear focus for us as a government when we're dealing with 501 deportations to focus on community safety as we deal with reintegration. And so that has meant that we've had measures in place where it's appropriate and where we are able. We may see an extension of some of the expectation on those deportees. We need to, of course, ensure that we are meeting our legal obligations. So we want to take a bit of time to look at the High Court ruling.
Do you think you are possibly? I mean, as the government...
Obviously, the High Court has made its findings. We need to ensure, though, top of mind for us is making sure that we're continuing to keep our communities safe. We need to take away those findings and ensure that the way our system is set up is both meeting our legal obligations but also the expectation of our communities.
In 2017,
keep in mind, not everyone that is deported as a 501 do we have any legal grounds to keep, for instance, supervision orders or other restrictions. But there are certain deportees where we've believed there have been grounds, and we have done that. So we need to go away and look at what the High Court findings mean for the legal basis of those restrictions.
In 2017, the Law Society made a submission stating that it wasn't a breach of double jeopardy laws. That appears to be exactly what's happened. How can the Review Committee's decision be justified if the courts have come to this decision?
Again, I do want to take the time for ministers and officials to go through the High Court's findings, but keep in mind here, those measures that we have had in place to date have all been based on our intent to keep our communities safe. Some individuals are being deported back to New Zealand immediately after exiting prison. Now, in some circumstances, they might have otherwise had parole conditions, and so we've put in place provisions that we've believed were necessary to continue to keep communities safe. The High Court has made its findings. We need to go and look at those, but top of mind will continue to be community safety.
Have you or your office been in touch with Buckingham Palace, your involvement in this?
With Buckingham Palace?
Well,
or with the Sussexes, or?
Yeah, over your involvement in this. Will you take any steps to clarify how it came about?
So, those who may have an interest may by now know that roughly 3 years ago I undertook an interview with the Mandela Foundation. They were producing resources for future leaders with a focus on young leaders. At the time I undertook that interview, as is common practice, the Mandela Foundation hold the rights to do what they will with that interview. And I continue to stand by that. This is now their footage, their transcript, and it's ultimately a matter for them what they choose to do with it. I've not been involved in the decision making around what happens next, nor have I had direct contact with the Sussexes over what's happening next. I see it as a matter for the Mandela Foundation.
Would you have given that interview knowing that this would be the end result?
Oh, look, I think, it was an interview that I absolutely stand by. The Mandela Foundation do excellent work. They've already actually produced a number of resources from their conversations with a wide-ranging group of individuals. I gave over those rights for that interview, which is not uncommon practice. I stand by doing that. It's ultimately for them to decide.
Have you watched any of the current docos by me?
No. No, I mean, look, and again, I wouldn't read too much into that. It's a very busy time of year, and there's been a lot on the agenda.
And what was your reaction when you found out from the Sussexes in May this year that the interview was going to be used?
So just for the sake of clarity, the Mandela Foundation has kept the office up to date with what they've intended to do with interviews, but I have not stayed close to that, and so I became aware of what was happening with it yesterday.
Can I ask about the COVID situation? Are you comfortable with the public health and government settings at the moment, given the levels of cases and hospitalisations we're seeing? And you previously commented that this could be the first Christmas where COVID might not be hanging over us. Do you stand by that? Is that premature?
Yeah, so just to give a bit of context to that statement, because I think it's been slightly misinterpreted. This is the first summer where there hasn't been the risk of border closures, gathering limits, cancellations of large-scale events. We do, however, of course, continue to have COVID amongst us. So it's not the case that we do not continue to take very seriously the impacts of this illness and work very hard to make sure that people who need, for instance, antivirals, who should have booster immunisation, or the public health advice doesn't continue to be shared, it does. But really it was just a recognition of the change in our approach to COVID over this summer relative to previous years. On your first question, here for us, we continue to monitor the impact on our hospitals, and we can see relative to previous outbreaks, whilst we do of course have a number who have been hospitalised with COVID, and of course that continues to be a serious matter for our health system and for them, we are not seeing at the same time a number of other significant illnesses which is causing significant pressure on hospital resources in the way it has in the past. Not saying that we are complacent about that. I continue to urge people, please, particularly if you have significant events in mind, if you have concerns around the health and well-being of your other family members, masks continue to be a very useful tool. Make sure that you're aware of how to access antivirals over the summer period if you're in our older age bracket or immunocompromised. Those two tools make a very big difference.
And is there any room for movement on booster eligibility given the looming sort of expiry dates of some of those medications?
So in the new year we'll talk, I think, a little bit more about the next phase as we see countries move to vaccines that are designed to deal with a range of variants. So I've no doubt we'll be giving updates on our ongoing plans in the new year. But for now, isolation of COVID cases, use of masks when around at-risk individuals or when you yourself want to be ensured of protection, making sure you're up to date with your vaccinations, and if you're eligible, being aware of how to quickly access antivirals. Those are all the key messages that we would want to share.
Do you think the public have become too complacent, and partially because they think the government has a complacent approach to this?
Well, we certainly haven't. Some countries have moved away from isolating COVID cases. We have not. We continue to ensure that rapid antigen testing is readily available, and we have wide availability and free availability of antivirals for those that we know would benefit from that added support should they contract COVID. We've never been complacent about it, but we have adapted our approach, as have many countries.
But do you really think everyone is isolating, that everyone is testing when needed and obeying those rules?
Well, actually, in terms of our testing, level of testing and positivity rates and a range of other factors, there is a view amongst those who are watching closely that we do still have a relatively high level of awareness of COVID cases in our community. Look at other countries. In some places now they are just not testing in the same way or recording or reporting in the same way that New Zealand continues to do so. So our approach as the members of the public have no doubt adapted as our rules have changed. But I still believe that people are taking COVID seriously.
On Fiji, Prime Minister,
yeah.
Have you sent any congratulations to Sylvania Graham?
No, not at this stage. But look, it's not unusual for us to wait until the dust settles, until there is the real finality over different processes. My understanding is that there's a few extra things that the system will continue to go through. Our role as New Zealanders simply to observe, support Fiji as it comes through its election process.
Are you worried it could result in at least, given that result is still a bit up in the air?
Yeah, here I think, actually let's just allow the process to run its course. But we stand ready to, support Fiji through its process should we need to be at any stage called upon, in the same way that we acted as observers through this electoral process. But, I have faith in Fiji's ability to conduct the remaining stages of this process and stand ready to acknowledge their new leader.
Have you had reports back from those observers? Has it been a fair, free, democratic election?
I haven't had anything formal at this stage, and I wouldn't expect it in too short an order, but of course it was a role we were invited to play and we're more than willing to do so.
One on COVID, Prime Minister. The former Director General, Ashley Bloomfield, talked about the importance of mask use as more people are travelling around. There's no mask requirements on planes anymore, on trains, anything like that. Do you think that maybe having kept mask requirements could have helped at this stage?
Look, we've, for instance, when we sat down and looked at the most impactful measures, there was a clear view that, for instance, the isolation of COVID cases was the most significant thing that we could do, the impact of vaccines, and then the ability to support individuals with antivirals. Those were seen as the strongest things that we could do, and those are what we have maintained. And again, relative to other countries, there has been pressure on the government to remove isolation requirements or significantly shorten them, and we have not. When it comes to mask use, there has been, over the course of several years, significant mask use requirements. We do now believe we're at a stage when people are well aware of the added benefit they provide. I have noticed, actually, when out and about, that there are a reasonable number of people who are still choosing to use them. I think it's fantastic that they see that as a viable option, that people acknowledge their use, and that there isn't, as far as I can observe, undue pressure on individuals who use them. But that is obviously this path we've chosen to take over mandating again, because there are a number of additional consequences of anything that we mandate. Okay, everyone, Merry Christmas.